I think we should dive in. Lauren, thanks so much for hanging out with me here today.
Thanks for having me.
So you started with Representative Lee as a staff assistant and really grew your scope of responsibilities quickly, rising through the ranks to become her chief of staff. I'm curious, thinking back on kind of your experience, just to kick us off, what advice would you give someone trying to find their voice and really lead from wherever they are?
Sure. And I will say, we'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to put things in the chat as you questions, comments as we do this. And then we'll make sure we get to those as they come up as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, my path, I have to say, luck and timing is always a huge part of it, right? You know, you work hard and you hope that those opportunities come. It's worked out for me, but also there has been an element of that luck and timing piece. But I think what really resonated with me when I first got to the Hill, and due to my career pivot, took a little bit of a step down before I could move up in the public service world, is that titles don't make leaders, leaders make leaders. One of my mentors told me that a long time ago, actually more in a sports setting. But you don't need to be the captain of the team to lead and make a difference on the field. It's the same in the workplace. No matter what your title says, it doesn't have to say senior director to lead from your current position. And that stuck with me. So, whether it's picking up a task that no one else has volunteered to do around the office, or, coming up with a better way to do something and then sharing that with everyone else. You can do that from the lowest levels to the highest levels, and I think that people do start to notice, even if you don't have leader in your title. So I think some of the best leaders we've had in our office have been like junior level, mid level, because they've adopted that strategy. And then when the opportunity did arise, say someone leaves and that management position opens up, it was so obvious that they were going to be the next pick because they've already shown that they had those leadership skills. Let me flip it over to you and ask you a question. You've also had, quite a few leadership roles, but when you stepped into that first one, what helped you build credibility early on, especially in high profile, high pressure settings?
It's such a good question. Your answer is so apt too, because when I think about like what was my first major leadership role, I often think about times when I was, suddenly thrown into an environment where I had to manage a lot of people or things like that. But in reality, especially sort of similar to you early in your career, I came up as an organizer, and organizing is in itself just filled with opportunities to lead from where you are and to sort of demonstrate that. But my first major sort of leadership or management role was probably on the 2012 Elizabeth Warren for Senate campaign, where I was one of sort of the first people hired on a very small field team for a while, responsible for sort of managing all the volunteers and the voters and trying to kind of get us all together in that area. And then, as often happens on really fast-moving campaigns, someone way up high was like, hey, it's time to turn on this field operation, make it really big, figure out what's going on. And very suddenly, within a week, I was promoted and responsible for managing a team of 5 organizers. And then from there, kind of over months and months, we sort of grew that team to be, I think, about 15 people. And it's one of the things I often tell folks about organizing and campaigns is that like it's this incredible opportunity to lead early on in your career, and there's no training at all. And so I definitely made a lot of mistakes in that time. And this sort of in campaigns and in politics, people get promoted because they're really good at what they were doing, but they don't get promoted because they know how to manage, and they're often not taught to. And so I think while I made a lot of mistakes, I focused on building credibility really through kind of teaching and showcasing my own knowledge of organizing. And it wasn't always smooth sailing. I pushed my team really hard. I sometimes advocated very hard for them to our leadership. And I worked really hard. And I think I built that credibility by kind of being a really hard worker, being good at my job, and really going to the mat for my team. But it was also a time in my career where I sort of like first got on a soapbox that I've kind of been on ever since, that we need better management training in public sector and political roles, because it's just not good enough for us to get thrown into these roles and try to manage folks thereon. So led me to spend a lot of time since then thinking about how we can do those jobs better and how we can kind of continue to grow in them too. So, which is really cool because, like, as you become more and more senior in the political space, as you have done, and sort of like what's really interesting about, I think, the chief of staff role is it's really about not only managing a team in this very highly structured environment, but it's really about managing in all directions. So you're kind of constantly managing up to your member of Congress, you're managing your own team in two different time zones, you're managing across to your peers in Congress. And so I'm kind of curious from your perspective, Lauren, what have you really learned about kind of influence and authority in that multifaceted management role that you have now?
Really. I think the good news is it's one key skill, I think, that makes you good at managing up, down, and across, and that's generating buy-in across all groups. And I think that's honestly just the key to politics in general. So it kind of goes hand in hand to managing an office. You could have the best idea in the world, but if you haven't, massaged that idea, workshopped it with folks, given folks the opportunity to give feedback, it's just not going to go well when you try to get everyone on board. And I think especially in a place like Capitol Hill or in politics where you operate in this ideas economy, much of what we do is subjective. There's rarely one right answer. And at the same time, it's also the kind of workplace where you can't accomplish a single thing alone. You quite literally have to build a coalition to get anything done. There's really no more important skill than learning how to generate buy-in. So figuring out what someone else's incentives are, how your idea could also benefit them, and knowing your audience when you're pitching an idea. And I think that goes for managing an office as well, right? When you're talking to your staff, when you're talking to your team, think about when you were in their shoes and you were maybe that junior staffer, that mid-level staffer, and how you like to be talked to or how you appreciated it when your chief of staff ran in policy change by you before they went and just changed it in the middle of the night, right? Say it's like an office policy change or something like that. So I think, there'll be times where you can't always maybe take everyone's input because, say, the big boss is telling you this is the way it needs to go, but still going around and letting folks know that you hear their concerns or you hear their feedback can make a huge difference. And I think that's the same as when you're trying to pass legislation on the Hill. So same scale. I think it applies to any workplace, and I really don't think you'll get far anywhere without it. But I imagine you've had a similar experience. But what are some of the strategies you've used, Melea? I know, chief of staff to the Surgeon General, a lot of other interesting campaign roles, but you have to manage a lot of relationships with colleagues across government at all levels, including, senior political appointees and, emerging staffers, or like you said, maybe campaign staff who have never worked in more of a formal work environment before. So what are some of the strategies you've used to manage these different relationships?
No, it's such a good question. I think one that people don't often appreciate because, as you said, sort of, I think the theme that I hear in both of your answers too, of sort of titles don't make leaders and you need to generate buy-in at all levels. I think sometimes, we make the mistake of thinking like, oh, hey, whenever somebody gives me the authority to do that, then I'll be able to do it. But in reality, there's at every level, especially in jobs like this, where collaboration in all directions is key. You absolutely need to figure out ways to generate that buy-in. So I really love that answer. I think one thing that you get really prepared for when you show up to work in Congress or show up to work in the federal government is like, hey, like it's very political here, and you're like ready to have these sort of like big battles of ideas with people to sort of think about how we're going to push the needle in the right way. And sort of that big P politics is really top of mind. But the little p politics, the sort of office politics, the interpersonal dynamics, the like micro power struggles that people have within it is really incredibly prevalent in every workplace. Big P political workplaces are no exceptions. And so definitely something that, in trying to get things done in a very, you show up at the beginning of an administration, all you want to do is get things done. You have a time limited amount of time to do that, and you're trying to move things through, but so is everybody else. And so sort of understanding that dynamic is something that I found to be incredibly critical. And in the end, I think for me at least, the strategies that I found that were the most helpful in sort of managing those relationships, whether they be up, down, across, wherever, sort of just like good human strategies, being kind. It's amazing how many people show up to meetings and are like stressed out and thinking about what's on their agenda, and just being nice in that meeting and taking a moment to check in, being helpful where you can, looking for ways where you can sort of support someone else's agenda, understand what it is and support it, and being honest. And I sort of worked really hard to apply those strategies equally to people at all levels, both because it's the right thing to do to show respect to your colleagues, regardless of sort of where they are in their career trajectories, but also because, like, very practically in politics, the people who are or seem very junior today are like going to be your boss tomorrow, or going to be someone you need to get buy-in from tomorrow. And so it just never is a good idea to try to sort of treat them any differently, both practically and from a good human perspective there, I found. So oh, and one more thing that sort of worked really well for me is just pick up the phone. There's just so many email angst I found can be avoided, and you can build relationships just by calling someone and be like, hey, feels like something's going on here. What's going on for you? How can I help? Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's where my limits are. Here's what I can give. Here's what I can't give. How can we do this together? I just feel like we've sort of migrated so far into sometimes email and text communication that you just forget that human interaction can not only sort of get what you're trying to get done in the moment, but also build a relationship for the future, as well. So those are some things that I always try to remember. Is just be a human first in it all. Um,
Very hard to read tone through a text or an email. I think that matters a lot in most of these conversations that we're having.
so true. Um, but maybe like pivoting a little to sort of, I think one of the reasons that sometimes makes these types of relationships so hard to navigate in public service is because um, people really care about what they're doing. And sort of when things don't go our way, whether it's like an internal meeting or a vote in Congress, it kind of can really test our resilience and can sometimes make us show up in calls in ways we don't want to show up, can make us show up to our teams in ways we don't want to show up. But I'm kind of curious, Lauren, what is kind of maybe a moment you can think of recently or not so recently that really tested your own resilience? And sort of how did you lead through it while keeping your team really grounded?
Totally. I actually think we have like a recurring resilience test when you work in Congress, at least on the House side, and every 2 years you have to get reelected. Particularly if you're working for a congressional office like mine, that is one of the most swingy seats in the country. We won by only 2.8% last cycle. And as you can imagine, election time brings anxiety for a lot of folks, whether you're in the administration or just, your average American who doesn't work in the civil service. And then it's multiplied for, my staff by the job insecurity that comes with working for a House member and having to be reelected every 2 years. And like you said, it can be both a blessing and a challenge in some ways to work in a workplace where everyone is there because they care so much. That can bring a lot of emotions as well, and high highs and low lows. But one thing that I find helps our team through, whether it's election season or just the challenges that have faced Congress in the last 4 to 6 years. I don't think I need to list what they all are, but is reminding our team and reminding each other of our why, of why we got into public service in the first place. At the end of the day, every single person who works in my office could be doing something else, probably making more money and probably having a better work-life balance. But they don't. And they're choosing every single day to show up in our workplace, even on the most frustrating days, even when you go 22 days without a speaker, and you start wondering, like, what am I really doing here and what kind of difference am I making, right? And I think on those days, remembering your why and remembering that every single other person around you has a similar why, but their own version of it, can be really inspiring. So we actually will often do that, whether it's in an all-staff call or, a team bonding type of setting where we'll remind each other of, like, and tell our stories of why not only we got into this public service career in the first place, but also why we continue to show up every day. Because it's probably changed since maybe 10 years ago is when, or 20 years ago is when you initially made that decision. So I don't find anything else really even nearly as inspiring as hearing from your own teammates why they choose to sit next to you every day and do this work when they could be doing something else. So um, I think you've had a similar experience in terms of building trust quickly with new teams. I mean, campaign teams change all the time. The administration is quite literally a entire turnover of a team, right? Especially in these fast-moving environments like the administration or campaign settings. How do you build trust amongst your team and sort of keep them motivated?
It's such a good question, and you're absolutely right. Sort of taking a moment, especially in the day to day, which you taking a moment to really reflect on your why, especially in the day to day of these jobs, which is like kind of like in most days, it's like any job, as everyone on this call knows, where you're like, I've got meetings, I've got a project to track, I've got a to-do list a mile long and 75 emails to answer. And it doesn't always feel like you're hitting that why. And so just talking about it is something that feels like really important. And it's something that we did really early on in the Surgeon General's office. We built a pretty large team pretty quickly. So it almost felt like very like a startup or a campaign. A lot of our team came on at the beginning of the administration, and we sort of sat and we set not only our mission, but also our values. Like, how do we want to work together? And we set those together and we reminded ourselves of them often. We put them in our onboarding for new staff. We printed posters and put them around the office. We talked about them at quarterly staff retreats and sort of made those really central so that we could not only think about not only the why and the big picture of why we were all there, but also the team and why it was special what we were building in our team itself. And people could feel a lot of pride in that, at least was our goal in sort of doing all of that. So I think that that's a really big one and sort of a big sort of one that maybe relates to similar to what you were saying, Lauren. And then the other thing I'll say that, I always think of and is advice I give to people at any role in any level of their career is that the simplest and fastest way that I've found to build trust with new teams is to tell them what you're going to do and then do it. Which you just be surprised how few people do that. And so for instance, when I stepped into the role as chief of staff in the Surgeon General's office, I met with every member of our leadership team and told them that like I saw my job as enabling them to get their jobs done effectively. And then I asked them how I could help them be successful. And I kind of looked for like one thing I could do for them like today that would make their lives a little easier, one thing that I could deliver on. And then I did it. And you can't deliver on everything anyone wants. You're never going to make everyone happy, especially in roles like these. But I found that sort of looking for things you can do, telling people you're going to do them for them, and then actually doing it was just an incredible way that I built trust not only with the team that I managed, with my boss, the Surgeon General, with my colleagues across government. So it was very simple, but that's one thing that I think I've always done to try to figure out how to build trust. Yeah. Lauren, you talked about this a little bit, but I keep in sort of like the challenges that you've had to manage through. I do just keep thinking about this moment that we are in right now. It feels different. And I don't know if other people on the call are feeling that too, but it just feels really different and painful. And regardless of where you are in the political persuasion, I think we're all here because we believe in public service and nonprofit service and giving back. And it feels like a moment where like the whole idea of that is being threatened in a way. And so have the amazing opportunity and challenge of kind of like leading a team right now in that moment. And I'm curious, how are you handling that? Like, how are you keeping your team focused and motivated in this incredibly unique and different time in DC when the work is really uncertain, the stakes feel higher than ever, and you're really on the front lines of it all? How are you doing? And how are you handling that?
Great question. It's funny. You actually made me think about a lot of congressional staff these days often joke that they'd love to have some precedented times because it feels like we're just always in unprecedented times these days. So that's like a running joke. But in all seriousness, like you've had the COVID pandemic, right? Which, sure, it had impact on, every single industry, but congressional offices were on the front lines of handling, those calls that were coming in about, what's this going to mean for my government benefits and helping people get services and all that, right? You had the insurrection on the Capitol, literally our workplace. You had impeachments. You had, a president convicted. We went, like I said, 22 days without a Speaker of the House where we weren't passing any legislation. And so the list goes on. It's been quite, I guess, this the last 7 years now, near 7 years that I've been on the Hill. It feels like it's always there's always the next unprecedented thing that's happening. But what I remind my team, and it's similar to what I said before about knowing your why, but even on the days where it would be easy to feel hopeless, I personally, as frustrated as I am in that moment, I'd feel much worse if I weren't in the fight at all. And I can say that with confidence because I, previously worked in the private sector where I did feel that way, which is what brought me into this public service line of work in the first place. But as frustrating as it might seem, as much as you might feel like you're banging your head against a wall or spinning wheels to what end, when the work is uncertain and the stakes are high is when I'm even more grateful that I'm in public service because my job matters. One small part, right? But I do feel like the day-to-day work, even like you said, if it can feel like emails and meetings like every other job, it's all, trying to get us one step closer towards, a better world, a better country, a better society. And so to at least feel like I'm playing a small part in trying to make things better, I like to remind my team that they all are as well, even if it might not feel that way on that day where you know, maybe that piece of legislation that you're working on just meets a dead end, or like I said, especially when things happen like people trying to literally destroy your workplace. It's important for folks to remember like we are part of a bigger mission to get good things done for the American people. No matter what you believe that is, right? I'm not saying if you're on the left or the right, you believe there are things we can do to make life better for the American people. And it is a privilege to be able to sit in a seat where you actually can affect that change, even if it's one small part. It's helping one constituent who calls in and can't get their social security check, right? So it's just, you can come back to those basics and remind yourself and your team that you're helping every day in the little ways, even if those bigger picture wins aren't necessarily, happening that day or that week.
That makes so much
But
sense.
you had, bit of a similar experience, and I think your own fair share of frustrations and challenges. I think in the administration, you have to deal with not just the political swings and uncertainty that's been happening in Congress, but if you look at what's happening now, folks are quite literally concerned about losing their job or not knowing what tomorrow looks like. So what helps you stay rooted in purpose, especially when, policy or leadership changes shift rapidly, and sort of how have you helped your team as well?
No, it's such an important question, I think, especially now. So thanks for answering and for sharing your answer too. I think there's a couple things that sort of come to mind. One is whenever I can, I do try to remind myself why we're in this fight. I spent a big chunk of my career working for Senator Elizabeth Warren, who used to say something to us, which I don't think was her quote originally, but I'm going to go ahead and attribute it to her since she's who I heard it from, where sort of the federal government is like an aircraft carrier. Your takes really, really tremendous amount of work to move that aircraft carrier 1 degree. But if you succeed in moving that aircraft carrier 1 degree, years and years down the road, the aircraft carrier is in a totally different spot. And so I think about that a lot. And I also think about the inverse a lot when I think about public service more broadly, because there are public service roles where we get to move like tiny boats really fast. Hey, I helped one person today. And I think there's a lot of Congress where you get to kind of do a little bit of both, which is really kind of an incredible opportunity. But by and large, in public service, it's in nonprofit work and purpose-driven work in general, it's just this leap of faith that somehow together we're sort of moving in this generally right direction. And that this meeting I'm in, this email I send, like this the constituent letter I respond to is going to like help us get there somehow. And so sort of that leap of faith is something that I do always try to remember, and that sort of image and visual really has stuck with me. I will say for me personally, at this point, like the folks I worked with in the federal government, political appointees, no one works there anymore. And beyond that, there's also this like very unique moment where a lot of our federal colleagues who kind of kept the government moving, kept things happening. Maybe some of you are on this call right now. Many of them are either out of work or working in really vastly different looking entities than they did before. So those are just like, it's just this moment feels really hard to remember that why, because it doesn't feel like we're moving that aircraft carrier in those directions. And it feels in a lot of ways like the work that we've done doesn't always feel like it's moving there. And so those are the moments, and frankly, like this is a moment for me where I find that really hard. And one thing that for me is really helpful in those moments is to think about the people around me and community and finding that. And so on days when it feels like maybe I can't do it for the cause today, like it just doesn't feel like the cause is enough to make me show up and do this today, I do it for the people that are in, as Lauren said, in the desk next to me, who do care about the cause for that day, and we can lift each other up. And in moments where even that community feels threatened, like the one we're in now, I think it's like one of the reasons I was so excited to have the opportunity to participate in this initiative, because these spaces that we rely on for community, we rely on to ground us in our purpose. The people that we partner with are really disrupted right now. And folks are, a lot of folks, myself included, are really like sort of more on our own in these spaces than we have been in years. And so it's one of the reasons that I think finding a community, whether it's this community or another outside community of like-minded folks, of people who kind of are grounded in mission and sort of helping and supporting each other through those, to just like fill that community cup a little bit for folks who might be feeling lost or at a loss in this time is something that, for me is really helpful. And so I always try to remind myself that the people are here. They just might not be sitting at the desk next to you anymore, and they might not be on your morning Zoom meetings anymore. But we're all still here and finding ways to connect and be together. And hopefully initiatives like this are a big part of doing that. So it's one thing that I try to keep in mind. But it's tough times, guys. Um, so maybe on that note, I would love to open it up a bit for bring more voices into this. I feel if Lauren, if your day job is anything like my job used to be, I'm sure we spend a lot of time listening to ourselves talk, and it's always nice to listen to other people talk. So please don't be shy. I have one final question for Lauren, and then I will pose the same question to the group and open it up so we can hear from each other. Feel free to answer this question or add any other thoughts or comments about sort of what resonated with you from this discussion. But let's start with you, Lauren. What is sort of like, I think this is sort of a theme, but let me ask it in a different way and see if we can get sort of another beautiful nugget of wisdom out of you. But what is one value that you sort of lean on when things feel unclear to you or hard to you?
I feel like I could go in so many directions with this, depending on the context and the setting. But since this is a leadership, discussion about leadership, I'll say one thing that really stuck with me when I got into the leadership role, a piece of advice that a mentor once told me, was that leadership is lonely, and not leadership isn't always going to feel good, especially when it comes to managing an office or managing a team. It's not just giving the rah-rah speeches and getting to celebrate when the team does well, right? You also have to lead during the hard times, during the tough times. You also have to be the one to deliver maybe to a direct report that they're not getting that promotion, or to handle like a tough, behavior or HR conversation, right? And I think no one really prepares you for that. Like you said, typically you get promoted into a leadership role where you're suddenly in charge of those types of decisions and conversations because you were good at the role before, which was more of like a tasking or project-based role, and now your job is to manage the people. You don't really do those tasks anymore. And I think as a natural people pleaser, that can be a challenge. And I struggled with that a lot when I first became a chief. And I cannot emphasize enough how validating it was when this mentor was like, yeah, leadership is lonely, obviously. And I was like, well, no one told me that. But it just helped to hear that from someone else, that there will be those times, and those conversations where maybe your non-management staff may not fully ever understand why you had to make that decision, since it would be inappropriate for them to know all the context, right? Especially if it's like an HR thing or a promotion thing, right? So they might disagree with it or see it as wrong, and you just have to live with that. That is part of the job. There's really no way to make you feel better about that other than knowing you are serving the office and you are making the right decision for the broader office. And your colleagues do all benefit from that decision being the right decision, even if they don't know why, because they might not have the full story. And I think that's true whether you're in the public sector or private sector. You're going to be put in those situations where you won't always feel good. But that probably means, I think, two things. One, you're human. If you felt good having those conversations, that's a problem in itself. And two, you're probably doing it right, because there's no world or office, or situation where if you're truly in a leadership position and a position of power, that you don't have to confront some of these tougher conflicts or conversations. So I've had also had managers who go the conflict avoidance strategy, and let me tell you, like, your team is worse off if you go that route, right? And so, that is part of what you're paid the big bucks or medium bucks for when you get into leadership, is to have those tough conversations, and make those tough decisions, that don't always feel good. So maybe not what people were looking for when they asked this question, but that's what came to mind.
No, it's so important, and it's a good reminder, I think, to all of us that um of sort of that role and that challenge of that role, and sort of what leaders are often balancing and sort of trying to do right by the team, by the mission, by the principle and roles like the ones you and I have had, and sort of the pressures of those pieces all coming together and finding a way to do that in a way that kind of lives by your own values, even when it is lonely. I think is a challenge that definitely exists, and is also something nobody told me until I got there and was like, oh, yeah, no, it's just me up here. Cool. Got it. So definitely one that is an important one to lean on. Um, so thank you, Lauren, for sharing so much of
You.
kind of your journey. This was such a fun conversation. It reminds me of kind of like why we should talk about these things more and more. And I'm just so grateful that we got to do this together. But we are not done yet. I just want to sort of open it up now for broader conversation. And so I'm curious, we can really kind of take this any way folks are most interested in. I would love to hear from others if there's sort of a value that you lean on when things feel unclear or hard, or if there's a leadership moment that you've had that really like taught you something about yourself. But also really welcome folks sharing anything that resonated with them from this conversation, anything they'd love to hear more about, any questions you have as well. So let me pause for kind of like a moment of awkward silence while we let folks take a moment, unmute yourself, or drop anything you'd like to say in the chat on any of those topics.
Don't be shy.
Feel like there was a whole other like set of lessons we needed in Zoom facilitation, for at least my last role, where we are given a moment. But I see Maureen. Maureen.
Hi, excuse me. Thank you for the conversation. I'm up in New York. Class of 82 I've had a career for over 30 years, running various nonprofits in capacity. Haven't been in government, but I would say as a leader, and apologies, I had to have lunch, so I don't like to eat on camera. So anyway, thank you for this. I would say as a leader, feedback I've gotten has been people appreciate your honesty, and I think what you said about conflict aversion, I find that, and I have many experiences with big boards, et cetera, and it's not helpful, right? If people don't have those conversations. So I think as a leader, as someone who manages people, being able to diplomatically, but be honest is a healthy thing because there's always a lot of sidebar conversations, et cetera. And people, even if they are doing well, I think often live with fear of their jobs. Like there are some personalities I could get fired and they go into work like today's the day I'm going to get fired. And so I think being sensitive to uh, being honest and also being sensitive to what's going on with you potentially and how that, the managing up and managing down can greatly impact. So I don't have a question, just that's 2 cents of input.
It's such an important point, and I think like a really important one to point out that I don't think we actually had a chance to touch on. So thanks for raising it. And one thing that I noticed, I don't know about kind of your experiences, Maureen and Lauren, but like people always know when something's wrong, and it makes them really like they know when something doesn't feel right. If you're like kind of unhappy with how they're doing things, or someone else is, or if there's a conflict. And honestly, it's so much worse when they don't know why, is what I have found. And so sort of finding a way to be kind and honest and transparent about sort of what's going on, whether it be with the organization as a whole, which, I think a lot of organizations are going through financial challenges right now, and sort of being transparent as a leader about what that means for the organization and what we think it means for the folks inside of it. Or whether that be like in an interpersonal conflict or something like that, where you're like, hey, like let's just understand what's happening. I almost feel like being in the dark, it just is always so much harder, and it festers in a way that can really endanger an organization. So thanks for bringing that up, Maureen.
Sure. I'd be curious from your experience and others about um, now that so much is done on Zoom and the squares and managing people and team building, and you know what, you have to get them together. We have mainly a remote office in New York, and you can get into rabbit holes and misunderstanding. As you said with emails, I had someone wrote, I took something on face value, and someone then wrote, I was being sarcastic, Maureen, and I'm actually upset. And I'm like, gosh, that's really hard to translate, like pick up the phone then. And if you're in the office, or gathering. So I'm big now on trying to do more meetups if we can in person, but it's hard. We've changed the workplace, even though I know many federal workers and others are being forced to be back in their workplaces. But any thoughts on that of the remote hybrid leadership, what you find or others find in terms of how they work?
Yeah. Lauren, how do you manage it across like time zones in your job?
Yeah. So even before a lot of folks went remote before COVID and all that, we obviously have a DC office and then a district office. So that's in Nevada for us. But the two teams are of equal size have to work seamlessly together or the whole thing breaks down. And like you said, it's time zones. It's two different types of employees just naturally by who's brought into that line of work in that office. And we find that if we don't meet up in person at least twice a year, you cannot build those relationships like in the way that we need to build them and really understand folks' day and how it looks on their end to sort of give the benefit of the doubt if, say, their piece of a memo is running late or, they don't have the answer for you on something that you need right away. You can sort of get a glimpse into like, oh, this is how things work out here, and this is why I should have a little bit more patience with, that person in that office. So we get together at least twice a year, the whole staff. There's never a good time for it. there never will be a good time for an all staff, training or retreat, whatever you want to call it, but you just have to make it happen. And I think it's important for the leaders to sort of set that tone and prioritize that across the schedule. I think the other piece is if you can find the time to send a staffer to the other office or whatever the equivalent is to your world, to shadow their day or their week, and just work next to them. I know you still have to do your own job. Time goes on. You can't just sit there and shadow, but to the extent where you can do that, being in person and really seeing what that other person's day looks like, not just seeing access to their Outlook calendar, right, but really being there and seeing how many things they're juggling can generate a lot of empathy across the office. And I find makes that culture that much stronger where people will give the benefit of the doubt in a maybe high pressure situation. Not sure if that really answers your question, Maureen, but that's my experience.
Amazing. Yeah, it's such a different world. And I
Yeah.
think one thing that I feel like our team in Surgeon General's office, we started as like a COVID response team, really. Like that was the job. That's why we staffed up so quickly. We were sort of one of the many beating parts of the COVID response in the federal government. And so we were all remote and we hired from all over. And it was crazy to sort of try to build a remote first team was not something that I had ever done before. And sort of trying to build those relationships and that trust over Zoom was really hard. So, we had to prioritize when it was safe coming together in person, and also sort of trying to set norms and doing what we could to sort of build those relationships. And I think, as Maureen said, and as I said in response to an earlier question, like picking up the phone, like making sure we don't try to avoid talking to each other when it could just break through that misperceived sarcasm, if you will, or anything else. What else on this topic, or sort of any others do folks have? Else I can go to some questions in the chat if nothing else.
Or if you came here because you're considering a career pivot or something like that, any questions we can maybe help brainstorm? There's more people on this call than Melea and I who probably have more advice and better advice than we do. So maybe they have answers for you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, Brian, organize this. I do feel public sector worker or nonprofit worker, we do need more love. Like it's been really challenging time. So I'm in Boston and work for a state government agency. And my background is urban planning. I'm an urban planner, but I come to Brown, finish my Master of Public Health. And my plan was really try to bring public health perspective to the planning practice. However, I didn't thought when I graduate in this country, public health become a dirty word, like so challenge in this field. And I like I like you mentioned about why. And I moved to this country like 6 years ago because of my job. I moved here from Canada and bought my two suitcases without any social connections and established my new life here. And the first thing I found a sense of belonging is brown. So I like the people here. So this is one thing, how great we even have this kind of simple platform to listen everyone's story. That is a very small step, but it's very helpful. Like for us, like on this Friday afternoon, we have like a relaxing conversation. And for me, I think about back to my Chinese culture. If we are right now in a crisis moment, in Chinese, there are two vocabulary make up crisis. It's danger and opportunities. So that's why sometimes I remind myself, probably we are right now in a dangerous time, but we also can find opportunities. If we want to try to find opportunities, probably we should be more creative, meet more people. Probably it's a learning moment. We still take time to learn something new. So that's why like my always like want to hear some other like public sector leadership to, hey, what kind of like hard skill or technical skill we can learn during the time. And also another part, we talk about our workplace culture. We work for like federal government, state government, local government. And also we don't need to forget the power of communities. The community member, they can do a lot of things. We still have power. We hold of power. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
It's really beautiful and heartbreaking all at once, but I appreciate you sharing sort of that journey and the challenges and the way in which you have been able to keep community front and center throughout that. And this has been that moment, an important moment in that for me, as I shared, community is a really important piece of what grounds me. And so I'm glad that we've been able to be in community together today here. So thanks for sharing that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up sort of formally with this program, and then I think Joanna is going to shut off the recording, and anyone who wants to hang around and ask any additional questions, Lauren and I will hang out and also welcome everyone hang out. Maybe we can have sort of a more informal conversation back and forth as well. But just for the sake of sort of closing out this part of the session, I just want to thank everyone again for being here and being a part of this session. And it's just, as I said, been incredible to gather with so many of you and so many Brown alumni who are at different parts of this journey, navigating purpose-driven careers. So thanks for taking the time to be here. Thanks for anyone who takes the time to watch this recording after the fact, and for generally being a part of this broader community that we are continuing to further together. There's information in the chat about upcoming sessions as a part of this career sprint. And just to give you a reminder of what we're doing here, this Alumni Career Initiative, nonprofit and public sector, is a spring-summer career sprint designed to support you through transitions, exploration, and connections. And so what's a part of that is over the next 3 months, the beautiful team at the Brown Alumni Association is offering virtual workshops and alumni-led conversations like this one. There are 10 sessions in total, each bringing some expertise, insight, and just trying to kind of be with each other in these moments. We are also offering career coaching and resources that's made possible by Brown Center for Career Exploration and alumni career coaches who are offering one-on-one appointments. So if you are kind of navigating a really specific transition, please take advantage of that. And then we are also offering sort of networking sessions that are pairing what we're calling helpers with seekers for meaningful one-on-one conversations. Because I think everyone, regardless of where you are in this journey and in this moment, has something to give and also something to receive. So those are just some pieces of this initiative that I know I'm really hopeful that folks will take advantage of. But really, at its heart, as I think we've said over and over again, is just the power of community. And so thank you all for being here today for that, and look forward to staying connected with you all until the summer.